The Pro Status Podcast. I'm Drake, and we have Jesse, as always. And this time we have Liam Monroe with us.
Hey, everybody.
Liam is an expert LED tech and media server operator. So he operates media servers for the content that's going on LED walls.
Actually, so Liam, how would you describe your title? Because that sounded kind of like...
I don't know. I hate using the term expert, but I mean, I would probably... I don't know. It varies. I started with doing media servers, doing content playback, all of that. And then have, as of recently, the last couple of years, moved more into LED tech and operating like all different LED panels as well as processors and just integrating systems to make it all work.
And I know Liam is super humble, but he has made a name for himself in the Christian and secular industry as being an LED tech and running content. He's worked with Bethel Music with us on tours and conferences. He's also done stuff with TED Talks, and he's also done stuff in Hollywood with music videos and films and things like that. So yeah, he's very well-rounded and definitely hits the pro status mark in his industry. So to start things off light and fun, what is the newest piece of tech that you've purchased?
That I've purchased?
Yeah, like for yourself, what's the newest piece of technology that you've purchased?
Or maybe a line itemed on a project. I mean,
my Apple Watch, my Series 5.
Ooh.
Did you had an Apple Watch before?
I did. I had like one of the first ones, and it was really old and didn't really work anymore. After a couple updates, it just didn't really do anything other than tell time, which at that point, just buy something cheaper. So
that's where my version 2 is right now.
Yeah, I have the version 2. Yep.
Do you like it?
Yeah, I love it.
Is it worth it? Worth buying?
I mean, I love it. The one I had before, the version 2, like didn't really have anything on it. So this one has like the walkie-talkie, which is amazing.
Yep.
It actually works.
Which is really fun. I mean, that's my favorite feature so far. So
yeah, the walkie-talkie. Well, and I have a Series 4, but the always-on display seems like it's actually nice because I feel like I'll look and it doesn't always turn on.
Oh, that drives me nuts. Can't stand it.
Yeah, no, it's always on.
I'm sitting here like twisting my wrist. I'm like, turn on.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Apple Watch is super beneficial.
That's the second Apple product in a row.
Apple. I mean, they just came out with the new iPhone, the new watch.
I know. I just kind of went full on with Apple the last like month. I bought the Apple Watch, and then I got the 11 Pro Max and an iPad Pro 12-inch, and I just kind of went all in Apple.
All the Apple products, which is funny because this is another technical thing. Is you have a MacBook Pro, obviously for your everyday use, but then most of like the media server stuff that you use is on Windows.
Preferably, yeah. I mean, it depends on like the application and like how much. I mean, primarily I'm using Resolume as of currently. Just starting to step into D3 stuff and Disguise, which is Windows based, and Resolume can operate on either. And it's just kind of application. If it's just simply like playback of some simple clips, then Apple's great, really easy to use. If it's more like with capture and weird custom edids and different things like that, then like it's a little bit different. Like I definitely prefer using Windows just because of how customizable it is. But
right. And you build like machines for that, custom machines.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Because I know you ordered that custom build laptop.
Oh yeah.
Is that the better way to go? Or do you think building a custom server or a rack mount?
I don't know. It also still kind of just depends on application. Like when Bethel Music was deciding on like purchasing a machine, we were going back and forth on whether or not to buy a laptop, beefed up laptop, or buy something that we could rack mount and stuff. And I had both prior to us looking at something like purchasing something for Bethel Music, and they each have their like pros and cons. Like something that you can rack mount like can be way more customizable as far as like input cards and like graphics cards and dual graphics cards, all that stuff, how many outputs you can have, how many inputs, all that stuff can be way more customized on that. But it's not as like, it's not super portable, obviously. Like, I mean, it's something that has to rack mount, and like once it's packed in the truck, it's packed in the truck. And also like on the ground, you're like, I mean, you can build out like a rack where everything's more like permanent, but we hadn't, and obviously that involves more cost. So with that being said, like, on the ground, it'd be setting up your whole little station with your monitor, pulling out your monitor, and then where do you store the monitor? And again, that's another cost of like figuring out where you're going to store the monitor, and then like your mouse and keyboard and all the other peripherals stuff. So it's great. Like, we've used it for bigger conferences where we need that. But what we landed with for Bethel Music's like touring was just a beefed up MSI laptop. It was all custom built, and it has dual 1080 Ti cards in it. Baller. Which is amazing. So it's got like 16 gigs of VRAM. It's got 128. It was just maxed out. It was like 128 gigs of RAM, 8 terabytes of storage, four of which 4 terabytes is a RAID 0, like it's two 2 terabytes that are rated together. And then the other 4 terabytes is M2 flash storage. And then, I mean, yeah, that's about it. But it's
a beefy computer.
A very beefy computer. But again, like it can handle just about anything, and it's great for us on tours. The only thing is that it has a single HDMI output and display port out, or mini display port actually. It also has USB-C, so I mean you can use some some different some adapter for it, but that'll process off the CPU versus the GPU. So again, it's just something else to think about. So yeah, so it just really depends on the application. But the great thing with the laptop is being able to work on it anywhere, and it's just you're not setting up anything other than opening it up. So
yeah.
Yep.
So what about like, what's the craziest? I want a crazy story, like the craziest setup, craziest content. I don't know.
The craziest setup would probably have been TED Talks. It was, I don't remember how many. I think it was, if I remember right, it was like 16 projectors. It was basically 8 sources, but they were all double stacked, if I remember correctly. All I remember from my setup, though, because it was all projection mapped, and it was this massive like wraparound stage kind of a thing. And what I remember from my outputs is like I had 2 machines, primary and backup or redundant. And I mean, that was really where I learned a ton about like just how like the different like components to the computer just interact with one another, and what it does like for performance, because we were really just pushing it to its limits. Like literally we had the 2 machines and they were identical besides the RAM. And that was one of the things that I found out on that one, was that how it shares, like video RAM shares space with like your computer RAM. And so what ended up happening was like our backup had more RAM than our primary. And so when we were trying to set up the primary, it just wasn't working. And then so then we moved to the backup and it was working. And the only thing different with it was
the RAM,
the available RAM. And so anyway, but the crazy, I mean, what that looked like though, as far as like system, was we had that one machine and it was pushing an 8K signal out over DisplayPort, a single 8K, which was going into a data path FX4, which then looped into another data path FX4. So the data path takes a 4K signal and splits it to 4 1080 signals. But if you push it an 8K, you can loop multiples, or I mean, you could, theoretically, if you can output a higher than 8K.
So how did you get 8K out of the computer?
The computer was able to push the 8K with it had dual 1080 Ti cards, so they were SLI bridged, and so it was over DisplayPort out of the machine into the FX4, looped into another to give us 8 1080 signals, which each went to its own image pro that were all frame synced with the broadcast system, which then all went to it actually all went into their switcher, which I don't remember what it was. Then they basically took all those outputs and mapped it to the projectors, and then we did the physical mapping on the set pieces. But
so basically,
yeah.
If you kicked your computer wrong, everything would have went out.
Not
so no
quite.
pressure.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up not really having a backup because the primary couldn't
handle what you're
couldn't
doing.
handle the
Did
AK
you want to puke?
signal at first, but then it was like, it was really interesting. It was an interesting environment because I kind of went into it expecting that everyone was going to be just really like, just kind of rough kind of person.
Cutthroat.
Yeah, cutthroat kind of a like environment. And it wasn't whatsoever. Everyone was like very positive and like supportive. So it was really interesting. It was great. So, I mean, I was nervous, but then kind of being in the environment, like kind of realizing like, oh, actually there's like, everyone's just super chill. Everyone just kind of, I mean, I think everyone's kind of chill because they expect like if you're there, like you're able to do it, you know? So if you're running into an issue, like I think there's kind of the assumption that like, oh, you'll figure it out. And so it's just like super chill.
That's actually great.
Which is awesome. Amazing.
So basically everyone was a pro on that set.
I mean, everyone there was essentially headhunted to be there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is really interesting.
I mean, TED Talks is
amazing.
It's huge. So they film that content and they release it strategically. They might not release the content for a couple years.
Yeah.
Until it's relevant, and then they publish it. Like they know what they're doing when it comes to marketing and stuff.
Has it been published yet?
Yeah. Some of it was immediate. Some of it hasn't been. The weirdest thing was like I had gone on a flight to Manila earlier this year, and on that flight, majority, like on the United flight, they had TED Talks, and majority of the ones they had available were the ones that I had done. So I was like looking at it, and I was like, wait, I did all these.
We'll have to link those in the show notes so that way you guys can actually like watch them and see what it actually looked like. Because I saw some photos and that set was pretty nuts.
It's very cool.
It was cool.
Yeah, it was sweet.
So you've recently started working in like Hollywood and doing like music videos and some TV stuff. Mm-hmm. And LED is new in Hollywood, or like new-ish.
Relatively, yeah.
Kind of explain like why and like what you're doing with LED in Hollywood.
Yeah. I work a lot like closely with Concept Pixels, which is a good friend of all of ours, Eddie Superman, and he's based out of down in LA. So I do a lot with him, and that's kind of like how I've gotten into doing a lot of this stuff down in LA and in Hollywood, doing these music videos and TV shows and whatnot. And he's been kind of pursuing very heavily entering into that market because up until like recently, I mean, really like primarily it's all green screen is what's been done in the past, and which involves a lot of post. It involves actually a lot more. I didn't realize this until stepping into it, but it involves a lot more like artificial like elements, not just what's created in post and like put in, you know, the picture and stuff, but even like, you know, as far as lighting. I mean, because the lighting actually isn't there, you know, from the set, like if it's just a green wall. So they're having to like introduce special lighting effects so that on the real elements, like the actors and things like that, like lighting and whatever other special effects are actually like interacting with them even though there's nothing there.
So if you're like driving and there's street lights, I mean, if it's just a green screen in a car, you're never going to see those reflections of those street lights.
Exactly. So that's kind of where like the concept of LED, utilizing LED in like movies in Hollywood kind of came about. I mean, early on, I think a lot of the LED product was just
bad,
insufficient. Like, yeah, it was not like, it couldn't sufficiently like, or adequately accomplish what they were needing it to. And look,
it's not high res enough.
Yeah. But obviously as like time's gone on and product has gotten better, like it's way more passable. And so, I mean, the idea is that you can generate like these scenescapes using LED, and it is a light source. So it's giving off like lighting onto the sets. And not only that, but the actors themselves can see what is happening and what's going on. So then they know how to interact with like the environment that they're in versus just
instead of thin air.
assuming, like on the
cool.
screen space.
So it can actually help the actors too, because they feel like they're in the set instead of just performing in front of the screen.
They can interact with it. That's so cool.
And there's a few like companies, obviously, like we've been starting to try to step into it with Concept Pixels, like starting to like step into it. But there's a few that have been doing it for a little bit. One of the like top ones at the current moment is Lux Machina, which again is based out of LA. They're the ones who did like Star Wars. They did Oblivion, the Tom Cruise movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you can like see on their website just some like examples of like how this like practically like works. And they have a really cool video of just like practically what it all entails, like utilizing like projection and LED like as a scenescape instead of just green screen. So
we'll have to link that below too, so that way you can check that out.
Yeah, that's right.
That's super cool. Is there a huge difference that you've noticed? Because you've worked in the Christian industry and you tour with Bethel Music and some other artists, and then you also work in the secular industry, like in Hollywood. Is there a huge difference working between the two? Like staff-wise, expertise, like levels, like are people required to know more in one industry or the other? Is one more cutthroat than the other? Like,
yeah, I think like ironically, my experience like in like the quote unquote like secular like industry has typically been, I don't know if it would be better, but like interactions with people are like a lot smoother. And I think part of it is like there's a little bit of an assumption that like if you're here like on this gig, then like you know what you're doing. And so I think there is an element of like assumption that like everyone, if they're there, then like they've got to be doing like something right. And and I mean, along with that thought, like there's also like, you know, I guess the cutthroat of it that like, I mean, they can find anyone, you know, those two thoughts kind of go hand in hand. Like the fact that they can find anyone and you're here kind of lends itself to everyone assuming if you're here, you know your stuff, or like, you know, you're good. And so like, so all that to say, there is like that element of like, it can be replaced, but like, in my experience with it, it's never like showed up in interactions with anyone. Like it's very much like, in my experience, I know I keep saying that because I don't know if that's necessarily everywhere, but it has been like, for me, like it's always been really positive because everyone's rooting for you in a sense, like, and believing that like, you know, you've got it. Again, because you wouldn't be there if you couldn't, kind of a thing. Yeah. Which that's a little different than the Christian industry, because I think like in the Christian industry, there's a lot. And I mean, like I started obviously like just doing stuff for church and doing stuff. I mean, originally started in production, you know, doing stuff for youth group and stuff like that. So like, and I think that's how a lot of like the world and like the Christian industry, like, I don't know. I think that's like how a lot of like the techs and stuff like come out in that industry is like, you know, they're helping at the church. And then
that's
like
how most of us started.
yeah, it's how all of us started in that. And I think for the most part. And so there's not necessarily that assumption that you know what you're doing. And so there's a bit more of like the hierarchical thinking, a bit more of the like overbearing management, and not saying this like necessarily in my experience, but like I've seen it in like in the past and stuff, and with other people that I've worked with and that. And so like, yeah, there's just not always the like assumption that you know what you're doing. And so therefore like people feel the need to like want to step in more, which can kind of just be more overbearing and
lead to almost the micromanaging type of thing. And just
reacting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so it's just, so yeah, I guess like that's the biggest like cultural difference, I guess, that I've noticed in doing it. It's funny because like as far as like what in my role, as far as like what's being like created and whatnot, like as far as like what I'm needing to do in the secular world is far simpler, as long as like it looks cool and kind of cool and weird, and in some ways, like in my opinion, trashy sometimes. They're super into it. Like they just want something that's odd. Typically, it's just like evoking any emotion. Whereas in the Christian industry, it's a lot more specific. It's typically wanting to evoke a specific emotion, a specific encounter. So it's a lot more like there's a lot more detail and a lot more thought. I mean, I know like in the preparation process, planning with other people, as well as like just in my role as like operating, when I operate, like there's a lot more thought into what I do and when I do it, because of you're more of like fostering something coming underneath something versus in the secular industry, you're more creating something as a showpiece versus actually fostering something that may necessarily be there.
That makes sense.
If that makes sense. So an old boss actually he was talking about like different artists and stuff, and talking about like how you can tell like great showmanship by whether or not they have a group of people around them or not, and if they can shine. And you look at like, Beyonce, and she can be there by herself and she's still putting on a great show. And you can look at like Bruno Mars, and he can be there at the same time surrounded by a bunch of people. He doesn't have to be the front person, but he's like the one commanding the show, so to speak. And then there's others that like obviously like need like this huge show to like supplement what they're not carrying.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a lot more of like that, where like the elements that are being created in like that world are more of like actually just, they are like the wow factor. They are the encounter moment. They are the awe-inspiring things. Whereas like in the Christian industry, it's not like it comes alongside but it's very intentional to do just that, like come alongside or underneath.
You're like partnering with what's actually happening on the stage and what's happening in the room.
Yeah.
I would probably say like one of the things that probably your experience is probably a little bit unique, just because I do know you, and your professionalism comes from the fact that, one, you care, right? And so you're probably going to be invited to projects with higher level people or higher caliber people. And so your experience is probably much more positive, I would think.
I
totally.
think the projects that you've done, like TED Talks, that is a very high caliber project, and it's in the corporate space, but it's like the highest caliber you can get in the corporate space versus some other projects. And
it probably has a lot to do with just the fact that you do show up ready to be a part of a team player, right? And so those assumptions, I mean, sometimes there's probably is a better culture naturally, but I would give yourself some more credit that it's probably because of how you carry yourself as a creative and competent in your work. So
thank you.
So we don't want to go too long, but to one of the other questions, and I think this lends itself to being a pro, when you're going into a show, whether it's in Hollywood or like on a tour, what do you usually do to prepare yourself? Say you're just the media server operator. Like what do you usually do to prepare for a show or an event?
I mean, it kind of depends on what it is. I mean, practically, like just getting everything together, like all the equipment that I'm going to need. It's funny because I wasn't necessarily always in this position or like had this like voice, I guess, like in the projects that I work on now. So now like I have like the freedom and the opportunity to actually like speak into like, rentals and like gear and like making sure like that I have XYZ, that is needed for whatever I'm going into, which again, like wasn't always the case early on. It was more of just like, here's what you have, figure out what's possible with this, which I think is kind of the dynamic of most churches.
But I think that lent itself to getting you to where you're at. Having that, like, here, make something out of this.
Yeah.
Really forces you to learn your stuff, but also become creative with that and make something out of nothing sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, no, exactly. I mean, when I had an opportunity to work with someone, that was like, it was just a really like incredible, like, and rather like high profile like job, I guess. And it was amazing, but I didn't realize fully what I was getting into. And I ended up like, I was asked to like create all the content for this artist, for this music video. And I didn't totally know what that was all meaning. And anyway, so like I created it, and long story short, like they all loved it and all that stuff. But like, the whole time, like I was just like, thank you, Lord, for all the years that I just had to figure it out. Cause I wouldn't, if I was in any other position where if I was given this, having only ever been given this, like, like that role, like just being thrown into like this high level thing where everything's just kind of there and handed to you. If I was
organized, prepped.
Yeah.
If I was always only in those situations, I would not have been able to do what I was able to do. So it's just like constantly like on that specific gig, I was just constantly like, thank you. Like, I would have not been able to do this. I would not have been able to do this had it not been for all the years.
Yeah.
So appreciate the low budget is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh my gosh. Not what I wanted to hear, but that was good.
Funny, quick backstory. Liam and I actually switched roles a few years ago. I used to do, my job was like content and media server stuff, and Liam did lighting. And then somehow we switched. And then I started doing lighting and Liam did media server stuff, which is just some random fun backstory to that. Okay, well, to wrap it up, quick, like techie questions, like popcorn questions, basically is what we've been doing. What LED product do you typically use, like recently?
Yeah, typically it's Row. Row just has consistently been superior.
Yep. Is there a specific product from them, or just a lot of them?
Row, like the MC7 stuff, is something that Concept Pixels carries. So that's what I use a ton of. And then also their BP line. BP, which is Black Pearl, and BO, which is Black Onyx.
Yeah. Okay, last question. If a church is wanting to get into LED, what's something that you would suggest to them to like watch out for, or what to look for? Because there's tons of products out there. Like, what would you say to a church or even a venue that's just looking to purchase LED?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot with that. But I mean, as far as like navigating like what product, I think it's just application. I mean, obviously thinking through like your application. If I would recommend one thing, if it's just for like aesthetic, just like in the building, just to put something up on, versus like what we've been doing like with the church or with tours and conferences and whatnot, where it's being filmed. The way that a camera captures it is drastically different than your eye. So it's just something to keep in mind. One of the biggest things to keep in mind, because that's where you'll notice a cheap product. You won't notice a cheap product necessarily by just your eye, but you will if you're filming it.
Yeah, that's
100%.
Super good advice. So if you want it in your background and you're going to be filming whatever you're doing, don't cheap out. Basically, there's specific products with high refresh rates.
Yeah,
and better shutters to actually make the product look good from every angle.
One more thing.
Yeah.
To the person who is like wanting to be more creative, their tech director, they just got an LED wall. They're trying to put content out there, and they're struggling.
Yeah.
Do you have any words of encouragement, or what do you wish someone told you? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Definitely less is better. And I think that's the thing that like people always think about is like when they get something like that, it's kind of this big wow factor. So then you just kind of go all out on it. But it's actually the benefit of in my opinion, the benefit of LED over projection is the black space. So like it can, when it's elements that aren't, or in areas, where it's just black on the LED screen, like it just kind of disappears, versus like obviously projection, a big white surface, like you see it whether something's on it or not. So I think like the biggest benefit to having to having LED is actually utilizing that black space. So being far more simple, just utilizing texture more than footage. A great pack, which we can throw a link in. Ezra Cohen has lots of great packs of just kind of textural stuff that you can use. Lots of black space. And it's great. So
that's awesome.
I think just, being far more simple.
Well, and just to add to that, you can use LED as a light source too. And I think I try to tell people that it's being simple, yes, with textures and stuff, and also being simple with, you can just throw a color up on the whole thing and match your lights or contrast your lights, whatever you want to do. It is a giant light after all.
Super versatile, yeah.
And so it's super versatile. And usually your LED is going to be brighter than anything else on your stage, no matter what that is. So you use that to your advantage too.
Yeah, it's funny, like when I do hotel stuff or conferences, so many people just throw up a logo. So we were on the other side. They just throw up an image and it's just a big banner. I'm like, it's so lame.
Yeah.
But it's amazing what you can do. Like just interactive elements, some motion, real light stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty rad.
Well, I think that wraps up this episode of Pro Status. Liam, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course.
If you want to hear more content like this, make sure you subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast, and we'll catch you in the next one.
That's a wrap.